I was in a place where like, obviously I'm making money by selling products, but it's just like, I'm not going to lie to the customer and tell them it's going to be there in 2 weeks when I know for sure it's going to be there in 8, right? So now you start to lose potential customers because it's like, hey man, I'm spending $5,000 with you. Like, it should only take 3 weeks, not 10.
Yeah.
So, again, that's the repercussions of not being able to diagnose something early.
How do we handle ourselves moving forward? I think emerging from a crisis is an achievement in itself.
Yeah.
But the journey doesn't stop there. You can't just celebrate. You can't just go out and be like, hey man, we deserve this. We deserve a break, deserve a breather, a little vacation, because we've just been through so much. I think it's crucial to learn from that experience and put preventative measures in place for the future, because that's just that. I can tell you that if we stopped, took a little bit of a breather, we wouldn't be at the position we're at now.
Yeah, venture hustles, life is really what you make it. Building up your brand is whatever you create it. Really ain't no limit. You just gotta love it. Working day and night, it's all about the venture hustle. Hey, venture hustles. Time to take it to the next level. Let's go.
Welcome to Venture Hustles. I am your host, Saj, and today Jack and I are tackling a topic that many entrepreneurs fear, but most inevitably face: crisis management. So every journey has its storms, but the resilience to weather them can often lead to the rainbow on the other side. So join us as we navigate through the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and explore how to not just survive, but also thrive during turbulent times in your startup. So let's get started, man. Yeah, we've been crisis managing last year a lot, heavily. So this is within our
realm,
our active realm.
For sure. I mean, I think you said it best. You will absolutely, inevitably face a crisis, big or small. You will face it. So we're here today to kind of talk a little bit about how to maybe diagnose one, how to get through it, what's on the other side. Because like Saj has mentioned, we've definitely had our fair share and our punches thrown and missed, so to say.
Yep.
So I guess as we start to dive in here, Saj, being the intro that you just mentioned, how do you identify a crisis? Can you identify a crisis, or is it more like, a smack in the face, for lack of a better term here, which is like, oh my God?
Okay. So I think before we get into that answer, I would say the first step to effective crisis management is identification, right? Yeah. So it's about having the foresight to see the storm before it reaches you so you can prepare accordingly. And, it's like a chess game. You need to be able to anticipate your opponent's moves so you can make yours.
Okay.
And, identifying a crisis basically requires having a keen eye for subtle changes. It's like you have to be able to observe patterns. You have to be able to monitor performance metrics, and then listen to feedback. I think it's rare that a crisis will just smack you in the face, like you said, but usually there are warning signs.
Okay, yeah.
And our ability to be able to recognize them early can make all the difference in the world. So I think that is key.
So would you say that the summarized answer to that would be to identify indicators and subtle changes, like let's say in your business? Okay. And be able to kind of take a closer look at them.
Yeah. Well, why do you think it's important to identify a crisis early on, right? Just to piggyback off of that.
Well, I think the most obvious answer is if you recognize it early on, you're going to minimize any damages or even potential damages before it really starts to, explode. And for the situations that we've encountered, there's been some that we've been able to identify before they even start.
Okay.
Then, there may have been others that we were a little bit late, and now we're in the middle of it, and that's kind of where the actual management starts to kind of come into place.
Yep.
But, I mean, the importance of identifying a potential crisis is, I mean, the reality is it's of the utmost importance. If you can prevent something from happening, then you should definitely do it.
Yeah, crisis often starts as a small issue.
Yeah.
Basically snowballing and gradually escalating into larger problems. So when you recognize these early warning signs, you can take actions before it snowballs out of control.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. So I mean, also, can you think about an example of a crisis that started small but escalated due to a lack of early identification and intervention? It could be your own experience or some company that you can think of, just so we can provide some context here.
Yeah. I would say an example of a crisis. So this was one of the first companies that I started working at, like my later teens, one of my first sales jobs. And essentially what had happened is the overall crisis that eventually happened was we weren't able to produce like any products, or let's say what we needed was, let's say, 10,000 products a day.
Okay.
What we were actually pushing out was like 2,000.
Okay.
And so essentially what had happened is the sales teams grew, but the manufacturing aspect of the company did not. And so essentially what started happening is a bottleneck sort of scenario. And even when there was the indicators where it's, okay, I have such a small order here, like why the hell is it taking 4 or 5 weeks where it should really only take a week? Why is this happening? And before you know it, we're on back order, and now I'm telling my clients, hey, it's going to be a month, 2 months, 3 months, where, when you're in the product kind of space where you're delivering products, it's very important that things arrive on time, especially from an inventory standpoint. If your customer runs out of a particular product that you're providing them, at the end of the day, they need that product. So if you can't provide it, they're going to find someone that can.
Yeah.
So essentially then you'll start to lose clients and start to lose customers. So that's, I would say, like a smaller example where if we were in a place where it's like, okay, our normal lead time is about 1 to 3 weeks. Over the last 2 months, we're averaging about 5 weeks. What's going on here? Let's kind of take a look and kind of dive in. If that would have happened, the company may even still be around today, but it's not.
Yeah, you don't just wake up one day and see that this is a problem. Like when that does happen, I feel like the crisis is already at its peak.
Exactly.
But a lot of these things can be avoided. It's just people don't really have the foresight or think that's a problem that they should address before it becomes a bigger problem, But I think from the example that you provided, sounds like a phenomenal problem to have. I would love to have a problem like that, because that would never be a problem in my world. It's always going to be when you have too many orders and you have production or manufacturing issues, that's a good problem to have. It's just, a crisis nonetheless.
It is, but the reality is let's say, so that's the problem. Okay, you don't have enough space to expand the manufacturing, so now you need to go buy a new building.
Correct.
Okay, now once you even start to look for a building, then you find a building. Okay, now you're going to move everything there.
Yeah.
Then you also now have to buy new equipment, additional equipment. Once if something breaks on the way during travel.
Yeah, there's so many.
So, it's, conceptually, yeah, like it's simple, but the reality is by the time it was, let's say, actually diagnosed and brought to life, we're fucked. We're fucked.
Yeah.
I was in a place where, like, obviously I'm making money by selling products, but it's just like, I'm not gonna lie to the customer and tell them it's gonna be there in 2 weeks when I know for sure it's gonna be there in 8. Right? So now you start to lose potential customers because it's like, hey man, I'm spending $5,000 with you. Like, it should only take 3 weeks, not 10.
Yeah.
So, again, that's the repercussions of not being able to diagnose something early. And a lot of it also kind of comes down to knowing your business and then kind of being detailed and kind of always being locked into the process. And again, like you had mentioned, having that oversight.
Yeah.
Constantly. So that's kind of what I would say. As a founder yourself of many different ventures here, would you say there's any, and this might be industry specific, let's say, but I'll still progress here. Do you think there's any key indicators, maybe more general, that you can say to guide like a fellow founder in regards to noticing a potential crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to note there are certain categories here that you'd have to focus on, right? One of the first would be financial, like any sudden changes in sales, in cash flow, cost patterns. The other one would be operational. Perfect example, what you just said, and any significant shifts in productivity, or quality. In your example, production issues. Also another category would be customers, right? So changes in customer satisfaction, just general sentiment, like a temperature check. Employee morale could also be a signal for emerging crises. I think the key is to stay alert and be responsive, because it could be any number of these things, or it could be a combination of multiple things. It could be a ripple effect of multiple categories just tied together, because they're all, so they're all interconnected in some way. Absolutely. We've dealt with that firsthand. Yeah. Okay. I thought you were going to kind of continue on there. No. Yeah. So now we've kind of covered indicating, right, or identifying. So moving on to, let's say you've completely missed that. That went whoosh. Now you look and say, you walk in on a Thursday morning, it's like, holy cow, the building is burning. How do you manage? So how do you put the fires out? Let's say you're in the middle of a potential crisis. I mean, what is the best first step in your opinion for you? I think once a crisis is identified, or let's say you're in the middle of a crisis. You're in the middle of one. So you failed to. So let me kind of put the framework here. You failed to identify the subtle changes indicators, let's say. And you walk in on that Thursday and you got 3-4 guys or gals coming up to your employees saying, Saj, XYZ, XYZ, XYZ. And by 2 p.m., you're like, oh my God, I'm burning. I'm burning right now. So with that in mind, first step potentially. I think I'm going to speak purely from experience here, because I don't know how other companies do it, but I can only imagine that this is what makes most sense, at least to me. It's once the crisis is identified, or let's say you're in the middle of it, right? Even if you're in the middle of a burning fire, it's still a crisis that needs to be identified. What exactly is it? And the best first step is to assemble a cross-functional crisis response team. It's exactly what we did. And this team should be tasked with assessing the situation, identifying, developing a plan, and then leading the response efforts. You were part of that team when we were managing crisis. It's critical that the team communicates regularly. It's exactly what we did. And transparently with all stakeholders and anybody involved. And I think that it's so important to know. I think that's like there's some key steps that you need to absolutely follow when you're in the middle of it. If you're already seeing signals, signs, and indicators of certain elements here and there, then I still think it's a good idea to have a crisis management team in place for when this does happen. But let's say shit hits the fan and you're already there. Depending on the size of your company and your organization, there is no harm in establishing a team that is capable in responding and taking care of matters into their own hands. That's what we did. Yeah, I mean, and to kind of build on that, there's kind of two things that you kind of want to address or think about. Even potentially three. Is number one, what's in your face right now, right this second? Deal with that. Number two, things that, let's say, haven't caught on fire but will. And then number three, once you take care of those first two things, how to prevent the fumes or the embers from even forming in the future. Right, so it's kind of like a 3-step kind of ordeal. And that's kind of what we faced, where, when we were kind of in that muck,
there were certain things that needed to be done yesterday.
It was
Right.
priority. You have to start labeling things based on priority and urgent. Like what has a little bit of a breathing room, but we know it's gonna burn eventually, but we have a little bit more time. But yeah, it really depends on the situation, the crisis that different people are at different points. But how would you say, how would you approach managing a crisis in let's say a startup of your own? What strategies would you say have proven effective to you that you would implement?
I mean, I think what you and I did was definitely a really good approach. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is just like the speed of how quickly everything should happen, in my opinion.
Yep.
Where once you kind of understand or identify like what the root cause of everything, like, okay, this was the result, but like how did we get here?
Yeah.
So identifying that as quickly as possible.
Yep.
And then coming up with a plan to address the current fires and put them out. And then being in a place where after the fire, after it's kind of, settled a bit, how to prevent it from happening in the future. And really that is kind of one of the most important parts, because it bears no use to anyone if you put something out, don't actually really fix it and do a Band-Aid solution, and then 3 to 6 months later, you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? You'll never grow. Your business will never grow. That's the reality. So make no mistake about it. You want to get out of the muck, but you absolutely want to kind of seal off that door from ever opening again. And that's really important, so it's a lot of times it can be a really good learning lesson as to what to do moving forward. I mean, I know it was for me.
I think that's great, man.
And so that's kind of what I would do. And also something to keep in mind too is, especially as like a leader in your organization, like you always have to kind of be really calm. And obviously in situations it can be really tough to stay positive, but like as the leader you have to be.
Yep.
So staying calm, not getting too overwhelmed in front of your team, kind of being like that North Star, I think is also something that's very important. Because if they see the boss or the leader, that North Star panicking, well then, everyone
Calm
else is
and
going to
composed.
be, panicking even more. And then if your team's panicking, that means they're going to kind of send that energy to the customers. And if the customers panic, well then, I'm not sure how much longer your doors will be open. And I honestly think we did like a really good job at that.
Yep.
In regards to the team and then also the customers. Like a lot of times 95% of the customers never even really knew or felt kind of the mayhem that was happening behind the closed doors. So credit to us, I guess, in that aspect.
Yep.
But that's kind of what I would say in regards to
I mean, we were very, very methodical. Just to kind of clearly outline this, we knew we were in a burning fire. We were in a building, and every building around us, the entire neighborhood was burning. We weren't just in one building that was burning. And we've talked about this before, that the reason why this happened was due to a couple of bad players, and that one of the first things was we had to eliminate and cleanse and clear. Once we were in the clear from that, then we had to deal with the problems that were caused because of that. And again, oversight, responsibility the leader always has to take responsibility, even if they're bad players. But the reality is it happened, and it took us there. Well, one of the first things that we did was identify the root problem, which I like what you said. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then we made a list. We made a very strategic list of how we wanted to target certain things and how to prioritize it. And then our crisis was different compared to the example that you provided earlier.
Yeah.
But I think it varies. But I think you have to be very, very calm, for sure. You have to be very composed. You have to be very methodical. And it's also very important to be decisive, but also be adaptive,
Would you say... No, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's just as new information comes to light, because we discovered more and more things.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you have to kind of operate like that.
Be kind of... what is this saying? Fluent like water. I don't think that's the right word, but,
Fluid like water.
Is that what it is?
Flow
like water? Maybe. I don't
Sure.
know. Anyway, would you say that there are any don'ts
Yeah, absolutely. I think,
in managing a crisis?
yeah, in handling a crisis, the don'ts, I would say, is to avoid any knee-jerk reactions. Just anything that is an impulsive decision can compound. You know what I mean? It's I feel like in my experience, it can compound the problems more than actually solving them.
Okay.
So I don't like making impulsive decisions. I think Also, don't try to downplay or hide the crisis.
From who?
I think at least with the people around you. Like, the thing is, the core key people had to know.
Yes.
And that's exactly, and on a need to know basis, right?
Mhm.
But I think if someone were to be, like, someone in your team clearly sees issues and problems, I think being more transparent is significantly better than downplaying it.
100%.
You know, and of course you can choose what you want to say, because again, on a need to know basis, but honesty and transparency goes a long way in maintaining trust, you know, during difficult times. That's at least my experience.
I would agree with that, for sure.
So can you how important do you think communication is
Everything.
during a crisis?
It's everything.
Elaborate.
I mean, it's everything, because it's, some might say the reason why it's even happening is because of poor communication, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
with that being said, when you're trying to address the problem, fix the problem, and then prevent it from happening again, I mean, communication needs to, the standard needs to be a lot higher, especially when solving it, because at that point, you'll find you'll find that depending on the severity of, let's say, this crisis or a potential crisis, you're walking like a pretty thin line. So you cannot afford to make a double boo-boo. So everyone needs to be on the same page. What's the game plan? What are the goals? Who's doing what? Let's check in on this date, see where we're at. Because also keeping in mind, when you're dealing with a serious situation, you'll create a plan. That's 5 steps. By the time you get to step 2, you might realize you need to pivot immediately and do something else.
So you're leaning towards our next topic, which is, this is a perfect segue.
Yeah.
Post-crisis, preventative measures. How do we handle ourselves moving forward? I think emerging from a crisis is an achievement in itself.
Yeah.
But the journey doesn't stop there. You can't just celebrate. You can't just go out and be like, hey man, we deserve this. We deserve a break, deserve a breather, a little vacation, because we've just been through so much. I think it's crucial to learn from that experience and put preventative measures in place for the future, because that's just that. I can tell you that if we stopped to just took a little bit of a breather, we wouldn't be at the position we're at now,
No.
So yeah.
I think, like, also, in regards to, like, post-crisis, like, preventing it from happening again, one of the things that probably one of my largest takeaways was that systems have to hold up the people. People don't hold up the systems, and that's kind of like, I think, like, what happened a lot with our particular scenario, where we had, like, some good systems in place, but in order for them to work, people needed to abide by them, where that should not be the case. The systems should always be in a place where if the people don't follow them, then right away. And so, in regards to kind of after, post, whatever you'd like to kind of say, I think we did a phenomenal job kind of creating those things or recreating those things or editing those things, so that now we're in a really, really good position. Personally.
How do you transition from managing a crisis to preventing future crises, right? So from our experience and from what we've gone through, what steps have you found, what would you say were most helpful in this process?
I think outside of, again, putting out the fire. Now, once you put out the fire, everything's, let's say, calm down a little bit, go back to that root and now start to absolutely dissect it. And that's pretty much what we did. Go back to the root. We dissected it. How did this happen? Maybe even why. But, what does why matter? Not sure. But how? How did this happen? And then, how did the blimp come up? And then how did the tsunami actually form here and then come crashing down? And that's kind of your starting point, I think. And once you really start to dissect it, you start to plug in those holes that your ship may have had.
Yep.
And then, now you're in a place where you understand what the indicators are. You now know kind of what your measurements are, what the look out for so that you can prevent them from happening in the first place.
Okay.
I mean, what would you say? So based on what I just mentioned, right, the measurements, and you've mentioned this kind of as we've gone through here, what kind of measures do you think someone could put in place to prevent a particular crisis from even happening? Like, do you maybe what sort of checks and balances do you think that there are?
Measurements as in like indicators?
Sure.
I think it's so to prevent, I think startups can, I mean, I don't know. I think it really matters. It really depends on the specifics of the crisis.
Okay.
But I think just being proactive, you know,
all the time.
Yeah, proactive, and anything to kind of mitigate it, just regularly do risk assessments, you know. And
That's
when I
true.
say regularly, it doesn't have to be every day. It could be once a month, a couple times a month,
Once a quarter.
once a week, twice a month. When we were in the middle of the crisis, that was every day and every week. But maintaining strong internal communication, you know, encouraging a culture of feedback, continuous improvement within your like just people that are directly reporting to you and people that directly report to them, you know, just.
Well, with that being said,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of maybe even alluded to this, would you say that there's any good that comes from living through a crisis and eventually overcoming it?
Absolutely. I think overcoming a crisis can be an incredibly powerful learning experience, right? I think it can highlight areas for improvement, bring your team closer. I think that was one of the biggest things that happened with us, and even with, you know, new opportunities that weren't visible before.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
a good one.
That happened a lot. I mean, everything that we're talking about today, to the dot, was what we lived through. We still kind of experience it. So sometimes it's just, you know, the roughest storms that produce are the ones that produce the most beautiful rainbows.
One step back, 2 steps forward, baby.
Always.
It's the name of the game.
Any closing thoughts on this particular matter? Any sort of good crisis management ideas, approaches?
I would say, I think one thing for me from a takeaway standpoint would be actively have like that temperature check that you referred to before. Even if the building, let's say, or the company, whatever, isn't burning down, or you're not having any, you know, immediate problems right now that, you know, require your immediate attention, have the check-in, right? Whether it's once a week, once a month, once a quarter, put something on the calendar for you and, you know, your core team members, or if you don't have any particular core team members, you know, think of a couple and put it on the calendar, do a brief agenda. You know, if the meeting's 5 minutes, great, good news. That's awesome. But you'll be happy that you booked that meeting out when, you know, your one of your teammates, your associates, you know, your guy, one of your core members says, hey, you know, Jack, we have a problem here, XYZ. You'll be so happy because now instead of that being a 10x problem, it's like a 1x, and you can address it right then and there. So that kind of be my
100%.
closing thoughts here. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think prevention is better than the cure. And I think
Short and sweet.
developing a robust crisis management plan can help navigate future turbulences. You know, and I think it's really, really important to, if you're in that capacity where you need, where even just listening to one sentence of what we're saying makes you think, then I think you should take some time and think a little bit more and actually take it seriously.
100%.
Because we learned the hard way.
Learn from our mistakes, without a doubt. So this is a good conversation, my fellow co-host. For those listening, like Saj mentioned, we hope that this may have helped. And as always, we enjoy having a conversation for you guys and with you guys. And you know where to find us: YouTube, Apple, Spotify, everywhere. Until next time, enjoy.
Yeah, venture hustles, life is really what you make it. Building up your brand, it's whatever you create it. Really ain't no limit, you just gotta love it. Working day and night, it's all about the venture hustle. Hey, venture hustles, time to take it to the next level. Let's go.